Hi, everybody. I'm here. I'm Michelle Loretta with Sage Wedding Pros. I have invited Annette Stepanian, who is an attorney, to talk a little bit about the California AB5 contractor law. I've been getting a lot of questions from different wedding professionals and event professionals on how this will impact their business. So, you want to give us a little background on this new law in California?
Yeah, so I actually want to take a step back and talk about where we were before this law, the AB5, came into place. So um, basically, there's always been a lot of different tests that we take into consideration with a lot of different factors when we're deciding how to classify a worker, whether they should be an employee or an independent contractor. There's something called the direct control test, where if as the hiring party you had the ability to control your worker, like how they did things, when they did it, whatnot, whether or not you actually exercise that right, that would probably classify them as an employee because you had the the ability to control and the way in which they did their work.
Yeah.
And then there was in California, we applied what was called the Borello test, which is the economic realities test. And this is kind of like, if you're familiar with the IRS
That's
test,
yeah. Yeah.
it's like all these different factors that you kind of look at, the idea of, is this person really out to do business for themselves? Do they have their own business? Do they have their own tools? Do they decide how they do their work? Do they
Are
decide
they an
when they do?
expert in their craft? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big one.
Do they provide services to a number of different clients, right? And so that was kind of the test that the courts would apply to determine worker classification. And no one factor was determinative. It was just this kind of like wobbly, thing. But really came down to, is this person in business for themselves, and can you control the way in which they do their work? So there was a case that came out about a year or two ago called Dynamax. And basically the California Supreme Court said, okay, we're going to clarify this once and for all. And we're going to apply what's called this ABC test. And so the ABC test says that every worker is going to be presumed to be an employee unless the employer can show the following factors. Okay. So the first factor is freedom from control and direction, whether like in reality or in contract, like you can't control the way in which they do their work. Factor B is that they're performing work that's outside the usual course of business of that
Mm,
hiring party.
mhm,
So let's say you're a photographer and
mhm,
you hire an accountant.
mhm.
Well, that
Perfect.
accountant isn't performing photography services.
Yeah.
But if you're a photographer and you hire a photographer, that this is where a lot of people are kind of running into issues, right?
Yes.
And then the last one being, are they in an independent trade or business? Are they really out for business, to do business for themselves, right?
Yes.
So only if you can meet those three, let's say as an employer you satisfy those, then the presumption changes that, okay, this person's probably going to be an independent contractor. And so what happened was, a few months ago, Governor Gavin Newsom signed into law AB5, which basically codifies this decision in Dynamax and then also extends it to like different labor and wage laws,
Yeah.
which we don't need to get into. But the idea is, that they took this court case. Now it's become actual like statutory law that's going to be enforceable. So that's where we're at. And it's
And everyone's
obviously
freaking out.
everyone's freaking out. And I don't blame them
Yeah.
because people have been operating under in a certain way, and now things are changing, but they're not really changing. I mean, you could make the argument that these factors, they've always been there.
Yeah.
They're just now, the presumption has changed and the emphasis of the factors has changed. They've
And some
actually
of the
become much
details have
stricter.
changed, right? Because what I'm really familiar is the IRS requirements, right? So as a contractor, all those things that you said under the old definitions in California, the behavioral, financial, you basically need to show that you're completely, or that contractor is completely independent in their decision making, financial expertise, all of those things. But now the details of those ideas with AB5 have gotten more intense, right? So the idea of a photographer who is hiring a friend of theirs who has their own photography business. They both do wedding photography, and they're second shooters for each other, and they're second shooters for all their friends, or wedding planners that hire each other as associates. That's where it gets a little confusing. What you said about things in the industry not being done correctly, like even before this, is true though, because I see a lot of wedding planners who hire associates who are contractors right out of college that would have never flown the IRS test, the old California way of doing things. And so I think it's good that you've defined that, because people first need to take into account, from a federal standpoint, if the IRS is looking at this, I likely have an employee instead of a contractor as it is.
You
It's
probably
to get
weren't
more
doing
into
it right
detail of,
anyway.
what's that?
You probably weren't doing it
Yes,
right
yes,
anyway.
yes, exactly. Yeah,
It's just now
exactly.
made it much more apparent
Mhm.
that you weren't doing it and correctly, and it's made the made it more of a high risk situation in terms of the potential like penalties and exposure if should there ever be an investigation or
Yeah.
whatnot. So it's made it a more high stakes
Yes.
to incorrectly classify. But yeah, I mean, to your example, it's if the person is being hired to do work that you do and you customarily provide, you know, a photographer with another photographer.
So it's your business model. The
It's
services that you
yeah,
provide are photography services. This is where it gets tricky.
yeah. Chances are, based on where we're at today, you're probably going to have to classify these people as employees. Now, I do want to highlight the fact that there are exemptions or exceptions under the AB5. So there are certain categories of like certain industries that the AB5 does not apply to, but the old Borello test still applies. Okay, so it doesn't mean that just because AB5 doesn't apply, they're all automatically going to be independent
Mm,
contractors. All it means is, okay, you guys can go back to doing it kind of the old way
yeah.
and use that test instead. So
Oh,
just
okay.
really fun and confusing. So, you know, there's your typical, like your doctors, your lawyers and things, you know,
The
they have
professionals.
the exceptions, like estheticians, like kind of random
Mhm.
industries. But there are a few.
Do you think the estheticians applies to like makeup artists?
Let me read exactly what it says. It says a licensed esthetician, electrologist, manicurist, barber, or cosmetologist, provided they satisfy certain conditions. And so I would assume, don't quote me on this, but if you're licensed
Yeah, a
and
licensed
you, like if you're a
cosmetologist.
licensed makeup artist and you satisfy some of the other conditions for the exception, you probably can fall under the old or be excused from the AB5
Yeah,
test and fall under the old one.
the regular one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So I just want to highlight for people that it's not all across the board in the sense that everybody is going to fall under this. There are exceptions. But within those exceptions, you need to make sure that you're satisfying the requirements within the exception. So, for example, they'll say like contracts between a referral agency and a service provider, where a referral agency is like connecting clients to different service providers. And there's a category for event planning, right? But to
Oh, this is like an event staffing service. Yes. Okay,
Mhm.
that's a great example. So an event staffing service that has their business model is not, they don't do events. They hire event producers and contract them out to event production companies all over the city.
Correct.
And that's their business. In accounting, it's kind of like a Robert Half International, like some of those temp agencies, essentially, that would fall into
Exactly.
the event staffing. But probably not if like I have an event production company and then I go help my friend who has an event production company, because that's not my business model. My business
Correct.
model is to work with consumers. It's not to work B2B with other business owners. Is that how
Exactly.
is that kind of
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So like there's, these referral services for graphic design, photography,
Yes.
event planning, web design. There's like different categories. So and I know I have clients who are in that business. They have a
Yeah.
wedding photography referral business. That's what they do.
Uh-huh.
They bring in the clients, then they dole out the work, right? And so
Yeah.
that could be potentially something that you would want to talk to a lawyer about, look into
Mhm.
specifically for yours, and see, do I satisfy the conditions to fall under that exemption, which excuses me from the AB5 ABC test and puts me under that other test. There's categories for business to business contracting, um,
Yeah.
and contracts for professional services that include certain categories, certain industries. So I just want to, I can't give like a straight answer to everybody. Like this is exactly like, if you do this, this is, you're okay. I just want you to know that this is the rule. These are the exceptions. See if maybe you can fit yourself into one of those exceptions. If you can't, I also want to talk about that. I think there's this fear of hiring employees,
Totally.
which I get. It seems very daunting. It seems
Yeah.
very expensive and
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
And especially for small business owners. Like I get it, like people can barely pay themselves sometimes, let alone like hiring an employee.
Yeah.
But I want to just let people know that the first time you do anything is always difficult and seems really
Yeah.
scary. And you're like,
And
oh
it's
my
not
God.
that bad, actually.
But
I think it's the fear of the unknown more than like the actual sitting down and doing it, to be quite honest.
because it requires you to like work with the law, work
Yeah.
with taxes.
Yeah.
And those are two things, and money. And like, those are like 2-3 things that people normally just don't want to touch.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
But
think,
this AB5 law is not easy. I feel like it's easier now to just classify him as an employee. I have to be honest, like the legalities of AB5 are way more complicated than like just do the I-9 form for immigration, get your W-2, get your, like there's actually just a few steps and then putting them on Gusto for payroll and you're done.
and
I
this
mean,
way you have
yeah,
the peace of mind,
yeah, yeah,
and you have also the ability, the comfort, and the confidence to scale. So as your business grows, you've already done the hard work of like
yeah,
setting up payroll, getting an employee agreement drafted. And getting an employee agreement drafted doesn't cost as much as most people think it does.
yeah.
There is a learning curve, but it's one of those things that as your business grows, this is just a natural progression. And so my point is, I wouldn't I wouldn't be as afraid of this as it kind of reminds me of GDPR, when like GDPR came
Oh
out,
yeah,
everyone was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, and then you just got used to it.
yeah.
Um, and then also just noting that the law, like, I'm sure the law is going to change. I'm
Yes,
sure there's going to be
totally.
lobbyists coming and
Yeah,
changing and carving out exceptions and things like that. Might get on a ballot. So it's one of those things that you just want to keep your eye on and see how things progress. And you obviously assess for yourself if you want to take on the risk of not classifying people as employees. But it really isn't as daunting as I think some of us think it is.
yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that too. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people work really hard to try to prove that they have a contractor, and they're often not, even under the old classifications or the IRS classifications. And they're putting way more trouble and risk into play to try to justify that contractor classification, where just making that step across the bridge to the world of employees is not as scary as it really seems. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have another question or anything that you wanted
No, no,
to?
this is really great. So I just really wanted to introduce people to you and give them that very basic understanding. I've been getting that same question, especially in relation to if I'm hiring other people that do work in the professional fields. I think most people, if they've been following me for a few years, know now that hiring a random freelancer off the street that isn't an expert in their field, have true control, like that person really should be an employee regardless of this new law. But it's people who have established businesses that are hiring contractors under that definition. It does kind of change the way that they do work in California. And so Thank you. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
sharing that with us.
I wanted to, this is what I knew I wanted to say something and I kept
Yeah.
forgetting. But I also want to say that when you hire, you don't necessarily have to hire people on a full-time basis with all these
No.
benefits and things, because especially in the events industry, obviously the work can be very seasonal.
Yeah.
So just know that it's not like, oh, I have to offer a 401k plan
No,
and
no,
health
no, no, no.
insurance and all these
Benefits,
things.
none of that. Yeah.
It's none of that. So it's just really about basically making sure that the government just wants to get their taxes, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's about reshifting the way that taxes are reported and collected.
Yes.
Yes, you also incur certain types of liability when you have an employee, but for the most part, it's just shifting that. But in terms
Yep.
of, I don't want people to feel like, well, I barely pay myself. How am I going to pay somebody a full-time salary? Because you don't even have to do that. So
No, you can
beware.
hire somebody for 2 hours a week. I have done it. I've had people who are working with me so ad hoc, and that's sometimes the paycheck just comes out to that little.
Yeah.
And in terms of a cost obligation, a lot of times people think that the taxes are so overwhelming. The reality is that federal tax for the employer is 8%, up to 8%, because it's like 7 to 8%, depending on how much you end up paying them. And then in California, I think it's around like 4 to 6%, depending on their earnings as well. And then that's, 12% generally. So you pay somebody, on every dollar, you're paying them 12 cents. The cost is not the make or break it, in my opinion. It's really thinking about how you want to scale your business, is what you said. And the relationship you have with the employees has a lot longer term of an impact on your business than it does to have a contractor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So
Well, yeah.
thank you so much, Annette. So I know that you have independent contractor agreements on your website. Do you want to just share your URL, and I'll put it also in the notes on the videos?
Yeah, you can go over to yourlegalbff.com, and that's where you can find a bunch of different templates to do it yourself. I do not do employee agreements because I do really believe that that is something you need to work with a lawyer
Yes.
with to do. And so I just think, just out of integrity, I won't put that up as a template.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you not.
Can people hire you to create an employee contract?
Yes.
Or yeah, okay.
Yes. Or you can go to a labor and employment attorney, or an attorney who's familiar with these rules to draft one for you. And it's really people who are hiring contractors in California or California-based businesses. So just kind of be aware of that.
Yes.
But I really would encourage you for employee stuff, I would stay away from the templates. Independent contractor stuff, that's fine.
Yeah.
And some of the other stuff that I have on my website is fine. It's just the employee stuff can be very state specific.
Yes,
And
I agree.
I don't want you to just like pull something off the internet and use that.
I think it's also company specific. You want to put stuff in there that is specific to the needs of your company.
Yeah.
And, legalities involving, your policies.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
And I'm going to share that people can get information on hiring the first employee at the People Plan on my website. So I'll drop that in the notes as well. Thank you. Thanks, Annette. It was great talking with you.
Thanks, Michelle.